Hey everyone, welcome back to Workshop Quick Takes. Thanks for joining me again on my YouTube channel. Today we're back to working on the Jeep XJ, and we are going to be looking at HVAC controls for the 97 to 2001. Now all of the 97 to 01s have a layout that looks more or less like this, but this particular panel here is from I think about 99 to 01 or so, and the only difference is everything on this side here is identical on all models, but this piece here is only for the later ones after they converted the temperature control to an electric, I think it's a stepper motor. On the earlier ones, there's still a cable control, so this piece is different. Nonetheless, they all take apart about the same way and can be refurbished the same way. Why would you want to do that? I think there's aftermarket versions, and there's definitely a lot of used ones floating around. Well, used ones aren't going to be floating around forever, and even if you get one, chances are it has a lot of wear and tear on it. So we're going to walk through the process of fully disassembling, cleaning, relubricating, and reassembling this. And as long as you find all the parts and pieces inside okay, nothing's broken apart, you haven't stripped all the rubber off of the vacuum control that lies behind here, then you can have a control that functions exactly like new. And it does take time, but it doesn't take a lot of materials. So let's get this on the bench, take it apart, and see what you can do to clean up your control. Okay, removal of the cluster from the dash is very straightforward on these vehicles. Too straightforward, actually. They're popular theft targets for a reason. But we are going to have to get this out of the way first, because that's going to interfere with removing the panel. So first, set your emergency brake. Second, turn your key in order to release the lock. And then, have your foot ready on the brake just in case this didn't work. But we're good. Now, if you haven't installed an aftermarket stereo, you may still have the 1.5 unit in cover. This here is an aftermarket by Metra that you can get at Crutchfield today. The main thing is trying to pop it out like that. There are 6 clips here that we were releasing. And by the way, if you've ever had an issue with vibration occurring down here between this and this, try adding a little foam rubber stripping. Helps a lot. At this point, you want to make sure everything's turned off because we're going to be disconnecting stuff back here. Next step is there are 4 screws. And it may also help to release the bottom panel here just to get it out of the way. That's only 3 more screws and you're already here. So make the job a little easier for yourself. That drops down out of the way. And then this would normally just pull loose, except that I have this aftermarket stereo installed that happens to be hanging over those. So I'm going to finish loosening that also. And that'll do the trick. Okay, next step here is where you're going to want to start thinking about taking some cell phone photos of things. These 2 wire connectors are not too big of a deal. Press that one in there and it comes loose. Or use that there. This one over here is quite large, but again, as long as you get the locking pin, the rest will follow out. It's this one here that's going to be an issue because these are not electrical wires. They are vacuum lines. And this thing here is supposed to line them up correctly, but you might want to take a picture and just make sure everything is where you think it is, because once you loosen these 2 bolts and pull this out, if anything pops loose, you're going to have an issue. So that should give me a good baseline reference. These 2 little nuts that screw onto these plastic stems here are 3/8, but if you don't have an English set, a 10 mil deep socket will also do the trick. Those really don't want to come off today. Okay, so if you're encountering this problem, one thing you can try doing is just putting a screwdriver under there and applying some leverage. That may get it for you. So there's one. And another thing you could do if you had to is just try and grab it tightly with the pliers and pull up as you turn and see if you can get it to bite back into the plastic. All right, so now you need to very carefully work this off. And if all goes well, that comes off neatly and it's ready to plug back in when you're done. Okay, I've got gloves on because the insides of these things have some grease, but to start out, we're going to pop off each of these. Something worth noting is that once you take these off, these dials have an unlimited range of motion, and some of the positions they can turn to are not valid. What happens is these here, these little tabs that stick off, they serve 2 purposes. One is to bring light through from the back side here, where the backlighting is, up to the dial tip, but the other is to act as a stop that catches on these. so that you can't go beyond the travel limits of the dial behind. Step 2 is to get this face off. You want to just barely twist it. You don't want it to overextend it, or you will start cracking and popping these pieces of plastic off. But once you get the first one like that, the rest usually come pretty willingly. So there's our cover piece. We will need to wash this. We do have our little lights that come out here. These are a bit fussy because on this particular unit they've been LED converted. Curious for your own possible LED conversions? It helps to know that this outside rail here is the positive, and then the inside is the negative. If that's the kind of thing you don't always remember easily, just take a little red marker and give yourself a little mark by each one. And now you've identified it as positive. Okay, so we removed everything that removes from the front. The second step is going to be from the back. For this part, we take a small Phillips. We can get rid of this dial completely by simply removing 2 Phillips screws. Now, all of these are designed so that they only correctly go in one way, but it never hurts to take a couple pictures. And the reason for that is this one piece in particular, once you remove this vacuum piece for cleaning inside there, it can actually snap on either way. So what you need to remember is that these 2 little points right here are pointed down, and these 4 are pointed up. However, something else useful you can do to remind yourself later is just put a little arrow indicating up. Want to do the same thing on the front panel? No harm. Up and up. So if it's always up or always left or whatever your rule is, then it'll be fairly straightforward to get them back together later. Okay, so now we remove 2 more screws, which are securing these pieces down, along with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plastic clips. Now as it happens, this piece is overlapping this piece. So we need to remove these 4 first and get this loose, and then we can do this one last and get just enough leverage to start pushing them off, but you don't want to overextend them or they will start breaking and cracking. And if you start having trouble like we're having here, the second thing you can do is get another screwdriver and just apply a little pressure under here, and you might get it, or if you're not careful, you might break it. Once you get the first one off, the spring tension will usually release the others fairly quickly. So that's actually not so bad. And then note that this piece here is actually in there. And thankfully, the spring-loaded ball that gives you that click, click, click detent action is permanently captured in there. So unless you start majorly disassembling this, it's not going to fall out. That means we now have our last piece here, and it just has this one clip, and it's out. This vacuum switch on the back actually removes from the back side. First, let's just slide this out. Nothing too unusual going on in here. Notice that we do have a couple things that are worth considering. One is that this grease is kind of dried out, and it seems to be picking up a lot of dirt. And then second, there's corrosion on these contacts from aging and wearing out. But otherwise, it's still attached good with the spring, and you want to be careful with these because there's 2 little plastic tabs there that are just barely holding this piece on. Normally they're not under tension at all because this is compressed down in there, but once you remove it, that's the only thing preventing this piece from popping off. So now we got a little up arrow on there as well, corresponding to the proper fitment of that. This here is also spring-loaded, so get the first one and hold it under tension. Once you get a couple of them out, they'll definitely want to try and stay out because there's spring tension under here as well. And that spring tension is holding on very tightly to this little vacuum switch here. All those little paths correspond to different functions. And if you're curious about how they go back, how to get this thing back together afterwards, well, the good news is they are keyed. Take that spring out for a moment. It only drops in correctly one way. My main concern about this is I don't know what this old white grease was that was intended to help lubricate. It's the kind of thing that could get into those little tiny vacuum holes there and clog things up, which would definitely affect operation. Okay, next up we got to get a whole lot of grease off of here, and then we'll have to do some cleanup on this copper. Initially I'll just try and wipe off as much as I can, and that green is the original color as near as I can tell, but you'll notice that there's chunks of it that are kind of dried out, kind of dirty, been collecting dust. I do like this particular brand of electronic cleaner. There are others, but one way or another you do want something that's ready for electrical components, that's quick drying, it's not going to leave any residue. Now that I've cleaned off as much of the grease as I can with rags and such, now we're going to actually use this to finish the job. Sometimes it's good on these just to buy a second one off of eBay if you can, because they're, you know, some of these like miscellaneous controls from old Jeep XJs, they're only like 20, 25 bucks, maybe 30, and then you can mix and match parts. But anyway, let's go ahead and get as much of this done as we can. And now I also need to clean this piece here and this piece here in the same way. Now we get to the part where we actually clean all this corrosion off of here. Good time just to clean up these contacts here. I mean, they look fine. I don't see anything wrong with them, but as long as I've already got everything pulled apart, it's a great opportunity to sand them that I'm not going to get again unless I take it down this far apart again. Okay. Doesn't mean says I can't do the entire dial. One consequence of what I've just done is I probably left little filings of coffee powder all over in there, and I don't want those to come back around to haunt us later. Okay. This one here is clean, this one here is clean. Those are basically ready to go back together, except there's a little bit of grease and stuff in there that needs to be cleaned out. Discovering something interesting. Whenever I hit that green grease with this electronics cleaner, it takes off most of it, but if there's any residue, then it gets a really pale green white, which is actually useful because then I can find it and finish cleaning it off. That leaves one further consideration that I'm still not 100% decided what to do about. This thing here has some kind of a like white, almost like a silicone grease in it or something. I don't know. Maybe I'll apply just the tiniest film of Silk Glide and see if that helps. Last of all, I need to clean this out and make sure that these vacuum ports are nice and completely blown out and that there's no leftover grease residue on top of here or anything that might gum something up. I have a feeling they are at least somewhat self-cleaning under normal operation because I don't know how else this could operate with a thin layer of grease on it and not risk wiping one of those closed. But anyway. Well, this is something called Silk Glide. And I'm going to take just the tiniest amount and wipe it over the surfaces of this. So this is going to go back together like that. At the moment we don't need to worry about clocking it in any particular direction. We'll get to that in a minute. All that does matter is that as we put this back on, it's going to have to line up with those two tabs, the narrow and the long. This side is going to be like that with those two facing down. There it is. Yep, seems to be back in place. Guess we'll find out. But I mean, it's not like you can really see it in there. I see that one. Okay, so I got that little visual window in there. That's actually good. Okay, I see the big one in the big slot. So if this one's halfway here, that one's empty, then I should see the short one. Yeah, cool. Okay, so we can verify that it's all in. Cool. Kind of amazing on a lot of these projects. Just when you're ready to accuse somebody of being stupid about designing it, you finally figure out what they were thinking and it makes sense. Usually. So I'm going to go ahead and just lightly grease this surface now. This is dielectric grease. This is actually a leftover from a spark plug project. It came with the kit. But you can also just buy like little ketchup packets of it at the auto parts store. The idea being it's a grease that is not going to interfere with electrical connections. I'll go ahead and use the same grease. I could use the Silk Glide, I suppose. Actually, yeah, let's do that. Let's go and use a little of the Silk Glide to lubricate the ball underneath here. I don't want to put the Silk Glide anywhere where it might get into the electrical connections, but back here I think it's perfectly fine. Yeah, that feels like a brand new control. Okay, so same thing's going to happen on this one. Put the Silk Glide down in here. And that is going to likewise go down in there. And this one has only 4 positions where it actually has detents. Notice how it just free spins otherwise? Those are not normal operating positions. Once this is back in place, and this is clocked to a valid position, and this is installed, then it's going to be back to catching on those little tabs there. So it will never travel outside of those 4 positions that it needs to be in. Or 5 or whatever it is. Alright, dielectric grease. those two are both ready. This one here's a slightly different animal. You don't necessarily even have to clean this one, I don't think. There's not much that can happen to it that won't either destroy it or just leave it alone. But nonetheless, this one has a couple little tabs in here that have to be worked back a rather frightening amount before you can actually get it loose. You could also try and do this from the top if you want. There we go. Just push it back while applying light pressure on this, and then it rocks forward and lifts out. What this is a little rheostat. So the center pin, I believe, is common from what I can tell, just sticking a meter on it, and then as you rotate it to one side or the other, the impedance between the two terminals towards or away from a maximum of 25 k ohms. And what that's doing is it's just controlling a stepper motor. This here, again, it has a little bit of grease on it for a detent action that occurs. The ball this time is located in here rather than on the stem. We can clean that off real quick and then just put some fresh grease on it. Once again with a little Sil Glide. Something on the ball in there, and a thin pre-lube application all the way around the wheel. But one other thing you can do to clean a rheostat if you really want to is just look for any pores or openings on it. In this case there's like a little slot right there, a thin one, and a couple little hole right there. And you can try and blow some cleaner through it. Again, just make sure you're using an actual electronic parts cleaner that's not going to leave any residue in there that might actually interfere with operation. And then in between spritzings, rotate it a couple times to run the wiper contacts. If this were a rotary encoder, it would turn continuously without a stopping point on the dial. You might find one of those for the volume control on like a modern stereo system, dials that run controls inside your car. If you can just free spin it indefinitely, it's just a rotary encoder, and it's basically telling a computer somewhere else that I've clicked this many times and I'm going this fast. And then that next device has to make a decision about what to do about that. But this here actually usually has wiper contacts in there that are creating that resistance end to end. Those can get dirty or corrode with time, and so doing this will help clean them up and lead to a cleaner, smoother operation. Once you're satisfied with that, the way that drops back in, we're putting this end down first. Notice how there's like a little house down there for these to tilt into. That's because you got to do that first. And then there's a couple more pins right there that have to be lined up before it will snap down in place. Yeah, went in without much of a fight. And then this has to line up on top of it, go back on. There we go. Okay, so all three of those dials are ready for reassembly. The next step is going to be greasing this, but there's one more thing I want to do before doing that. What I've done is I've taken the little push-in lights and I've actually replaced them with these little LEDs. But we can do better than that since we have everything taken apart. One popular option is to use these strip LEDs that already have resistors built in for 12 volts. You can see how if I stuck a couple of these on, maybe one there, maybe another one there. And if necessary, I could even loop one through here or through here somewhere. Pretty easy to do. And then I just need to solder a couple of leads out to either this hole or this hole where those coming in. Just remembering that this terminal here coming in is the positive feed for those lights, turned on by the headlight switch. And then the master ground for everything comes through on this big looping thing right here. So. Okay, when reconfiguring an LED layout, you got to make a decision about where you want to position things. Originally, of course, there was an incandescent lamp coming through here, and then a second one here, and then that was enough backlighting throughout this whole thing to illuminate all this. And then this is all black except for where it allows light through. Unfortunately, because these strip LEDs are old, they're off this reel here that I bought a long time ago. I am going to go ahead, pull these, and then re-stick them onto this industrial-grade adhesive that I got from surplus at some point. This adhesive film sticks to everything. Okay, so now that should be super duper sticky. And this is freshly cleaned, so I don't think it'll have any trouble making a reasonably permanent adherence. Oh yeah. But yeah, that looks like good positioning. Let's start with those and see how they look. So the next thing is I've got the smallest wires I could find in my collection, and I need to wire from here to here, from here to here, and then I need to pull power from either this port or this port here. Okay, that should be a solid connection. And a little positive to wrap around. Okay. So that should make a solid connection between there and there. Now I need the same thing again around this corner here. Okay, if all went well, that should now produce 12 volt LED lighting in here. Now that we're fully connected, the only thing left to do is hook up 13.8 volts and see if it lights. This one long pad here is all negative, so we'll connect negative there. And then this end one here is positive, so let's connect positive on there. There you go. Kind of works. What I'm getting out of this though is I either need to put some diffusers in there or add more little light strips around here because I'm getting very ununiform brightness there. Okay, best and final. I ended up adding a couple more sections of LEDs because I wasn't quite happy with the way the light was diffusing, so that gets us to that now. Another thing I did is I made this little diffuser shield, and there happened to be a little knob right here that had no hole drilled in it that looked like it was just perfect for that purpose. This is a piece of polycarbonate or Lexan or whatever you want to call it, and then on the back here, to help additionally diffuse, is a piece of old stair riser tread, you know, kind of like a plastic vinyl. I used it on body panels in the Jeep just to give them a little durability, but it's also nice at light scattering. And then a little piece of cloth tape on the end here with a bend down so that it just sort of presses right there, and that keeps it from rattling in here. So I only need one screw to install it. And when I do, I go from having a mostly point light source to a more diffused light source. Kill the lights. Not perfectly uniform, but it's a lot closer, and that's about as close as I really want to mess with right now. I'm going to be looking at it mostly from this angle anyway, down under the dash, and from here it looks pretty good. I can see all the functions. They're pretty brightly lit. Okay, we're back to gloves and grease, I'm afraid. All of this here needs to be thoroughly cleaned up. The other thing I can do just to reduce corrosion is just really thinly apply grease over the rest of the copper here too. See if that gets it. Finishing everything else together, you need to remember that this goes first. And the reason this goes first is because it has to mount down over this screw hole here, and then that thing snaps over to finish holding it in place. So this here has only one clip on it and one screw. It's going to go back in this hole right here. Be careful not to just set this on the bench and start pressing down on it with a screwdriver. If you don't remember, you don't want to bash this off. This one here, pretty straightforward also. Remember, this only goes in one way. Once the two screw holes are lined up, there you are. And last of all, this piece has to go in here, but to make sure we're in good shape, let's drop that in first and then try and slide this over it. And if all these little electrical connectors line up, then we're still good down here. Looks like. So that all snaps down into place. There's one final screw that goes down in here, and we won't be reusing that lamp hole. And something happened. Got that on upside down. Managed to flip it over in spite of myself. So we'll flip that around last here. Oopsie. This will also make your life easier, getting it the right side up. Okay, so in spite of myself, I managed to get this little piece on backwards, so we will have to redo that. There we go. Okay. Now if I attach one of these, see what happens. Okay, I see an empty space. And I see a narrow slot that's lined up, so I think we're all good. And finally, there it is. Just a little bit more cleanup on these knobs, I think. One more thing I can do to clean this up a bit. You remember how badly behaved these were coming off of here? Well, here's a 1/4 20 thread fitting, which I've run up and down here a couple times. So hopefully that cleans up the plastic just a little bit. Hopefully it works at least as well as it did before I took it apart. But only one way to find out. Okay, back in the vehicle. And just like before, it's going to be the reverse of what we did to get it in there. Moment of truth. Does everything still work normally? Or do I blow fuses? Well, so far everything feels like it's working. Don't know for sure yet whether or not I have RKVC control, but oh, sure enough, I think it's kicking in and out. Last step then is just to finish reassembling the dash. This is going to have to go back up here. Okay, same as before. Make sure your e-brake is still set, because we're going to have to pull this back in order to fit the remaining dash piece in there. Well, that's what there is to it. It's actually pretty easy to get it out of the dash. It takes a lot longer to clean it up on the bench, but so far all the controls seem to be working the way they're supposed to, and I had a couple positions that didn't seem to be before. Off wasn't quite off. I think the fan would still run, and the AC would run in any position. So hopefully that fixed it. I'll have to drive it a bit and find out, but either way, it was worth it because it needed to be cleaned up in there regardless. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again today. Hopefully you found that helpful. I know that was a little bit of a longer episode, but if you're going to do this, you want to see how it's done right, because there are parts and pieces here which, if you broke them up, do not go back together again. They're manufactured the way they are, and once you start breaking off plastic pieces or whatever, then they're not going to work, and then you do have to buy a new one. Now, again, there is some differences between the 97, 98, and the 99 to 01s after they changed the design, but they all come apart about the same way. Most of the cleaning process is the same regardless of which one you have, and even some of the Jeep TJ controls are very similar to this. It's a narrower bezel and a little bit different layout, but you'll see a lot of very similar hardware on one of those if you take it apart, and you probably end up having to clean it about the same way. So, thanks for joining us again today on Workshop Quick Takes. We'll see you again next time, whenever that is. Has anyone seen my phone?